Hi, everyone. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Let people trickle in as we're just past the hour. Hello and good afternoon to those folks just joining. We're going to get started in just about a minute or so. Let a few more folks trickle in. Okay, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar this afternoon or morning if you're on the West Coast. Today's webinar on how Gen AI companies break into enterprise procurement. My name is Eli Sherman. I'm a data scientist at Credo AI, and I have the distinct pleasure of being joined today by Megan Anderson of Jasper. Megan, would you care to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, thanks so much for having me here. I'm Megan Keeney Anderson. I run marketing for Jasper. We build AI co-pilots for marketers. And obviously, the choices that we're making along the way to build our co-pilot to be trustworthy, reliable, secure, and then also to educate our customers on how best to roll this out in a responsible way, top of mind for us. So I love the topic and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Megan. So there we go. So what are we going to be talking about today? First, I'll be speaking to the Credo AI side of things and how Gen AI really has taken the industry by storm, both in terms of the promise and in terms of the risks. There's a lot of concern out in the AI industry and just enterprises in general surrounding Gen AI, and we're going to get into some of those risks. And then we're going to move into a discussion of Credo AI's Gen AI trust reports, which we see as sort of the first step in building a standard lingua franca of how enterprises and the Gen AI vendors that they're thinking of buying from can communicate about risk, can communicate about trustworthy and responsible development of those AI systems. And then during the second half, I'm going to hand it over to Megan to talk about how Jasper is building trust as one of those Gen AI vendors in this ecosystem. At the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. In the meantime, feel free to pop a question in the chat. If it's a simple question, Lucas, our marketing manager, will be able to answer over chat directly. And if not, we'll be happy to take the question at the end. Okay, so let's get started. So who is Credo AI? We are the leading AI governance software platform, and we enable companies to procure, develop, and use AI responsibly. And in particular, we want to enable our customers to deploy AI that is safe, compliant, secure, fair, and most importantly, human-centered. We are made up of a team of all-star talent with alumni from many of the biggest tech companies and most prestigious brands in tech and in AI. And we're a venture-backed company with funding from the likes of Sands Capital and Decibel Ventures. Our company and our product have been recognized by numerous media outlets and awards for our contributions to this space. And what I think I'm most proud of as a member of the research team is our interaction with standard-setting bodies and nonprofits that are focused on building a better AI future. So what is the reality of the AI space right now in 2023, especially for enterprises? Enterprises have a conflicting mandate between adopting generative AI quickly and AI in general, but also doing so safely. So we've seen and heard from many of our enterprise customers and enterprises out in the industry that generative AI poses a lot of opportunities for companies. They see the benefits of automating work, enabling employees to do work better and more efficiently, and at the same time, various risks, which I'll get into in just a moment. And as enterprises face this mandate, this adopt to keep up with competitors, but also do so safely to avoid the risks, they're confronted with a third sort of pressure, which is that their employees are already adopting generative AI, often in unapproved ways. So you think ChatGPT or Bard are free applications on the internet that employees can just use and experiment with. And that has benefits and risks, right? If you don't understand the tool that you're using, you could be subjecting yourself and your company to hallucinations and IP risk and the other risks that we've heard about over the last year or so. And at the same time, enabling employees to explore is an opportunity for innovation. And so enterprises really are faced with the question of how do we enable this innovation? How do we enable upskilling while limiting sort of that downside risk? To get into the risks a little bit, I mentioned a few. Ultimately, these risks are a sampling on this slide, but there are numerous risks, and this is something actually that if you're curious and want to go into more detail, Credo AI is happy to work with you to identify the risks that are most likely to apply to your organization. But the ones that we hear most frequently are often not necessarily AI specific risks, things like IP leakage, your company putting proprietary information or trade secrets out into the ether, putting them into some model, and you don't know where that information is going to go. Things like security and privacy, and then compliance with data privacy laws like GDPR. And we really believe that that focus comes from sort of learned pain over the last 10 to 20 years of enterprise risk being related to those software risks, right? Security, privacy. And what I think we'll see is that over time, as enterprises get a better grasp on those classical risks, the other more AI specific risks will come into play. So things like hallucinations will become much more of the top of mind concern. So getting into sort of our specific research, I mentioned we talk a lot to enterprises. Our primary customers are enterprises. We wanted to get a sense of what are they most concerned about. I got into this a little bit just a moment ago. And more importantly, what are their needs for adopting and responsibly using generative AI? We've heard, from this group that everyone sees the power of Gen AI sort of at their feet, and these top line sort of classical software risks are top of mind. But the fact that employees are already able to use generative AI means that there's sort of an urgency, an immediacy to needing to lock down and control the use of generative AI to avoid those risks that are so pressing for the enterprise sort of top-down governance. And in order to really realize the benefits and potential of generative AI, the AI governance persona within any company, could be one person or a team, they need to be an enabler, because if they can't build trust with their employees are never going to really want to follow whatever top-down compliance or internal corporate policy is being placed upon them. So for a lot of our customers, the answer here was an initial do not use mandate, which is a crude instrument, a blunt instrument to solve this problem of stopping your employees from leaking IP or stopping your employees from potentially generating hallucinatory content and not really checking it. And this is effective in certain ways, right? It essentially eliminates many of those risks, but it's slow and it's inconvenient for the enterprise to adopt. And ultimately, if that remains the policy going forward, that prevents the enterprise ultimately from realizing these benefits. And so what we have heard is a desire for the enterprise to move into more of a traditional procurement model where each vendor that employees want to use or that the company wants to use can be vetted for the degree to which they're practicing responsible and trustworthy development and responsible and trustworthy deployment, and then use that procurement process as a way of ensuring the responsibility for their organization. But, and I think this is maybe one of the most important points here, enterprises are unfamiliar with the AI space. They don't know what are the right questions to be asking of our vendors. They don't know how to validate the information that vendors are providing back. And so while enterprises are familiar with procurement and, for instance, cybersecurity procurement processes, there needs to be an adjustment and a standardization around what are they asking of any given vendor, or maybe specifically, what are they asking of an LLM vendor or a vendor that provides a model for image generation. So as sort of to summarize that as we move into the discussion on trust reports, enterprises are going to be expecting enterprise grade compliance, enterprise grade procurement processes that are formal and make them feel comfortable. But this is a two-sided market. Startups are the other side, and they don't have endless resources to fill out a 300 question procurement questionnaire for every single enterprise customer. And especially given the fact that any given deal could be the deal that sets them on the path forward to success, and missing out on deals because you're wasting time with too many procurement questionnaires, or you ineffectively or unsuccessfully fill out a questionnaire and lose a deal, that can be life or death for a startup. And so there's a need for startups to have some sort of standardization as well. So that's what brings us to Credo AI's AI trust reports. This is our first contribution towards a standard of what should be that sort of communication, that lingua franca, as I said at the beginning, of how to talk about risk, how to talk about responsible development between the big enterprise risk-averse personas that are procuring systems from generative AI vendors, and then on the other side, the generative AI vendors, the startups that are trying to sell, that are doing their honest best to develop in a responsible way, to follow industry best practices, but are combating the fact that industry best practices aren't well communicated, aren't necessarily always clear. And so they need a way to stand out in the crowd and prove that what they're doing is aligned with the enterprise values. And ultimately, this leads to this idea that AI trust is an ecosystem. You need both sides, and ultimately governments and nonprofits and organizations that aren't exactly in the middle of that relationship. You need organizations that are able to tie together these groups of standard-setting bodies and regulators and the enterprises and the startups that are building. And we see ourselves as sitting right at the middle of this. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Megan to talk about how Jasper fits in to these relationships in building trust in the AI ecosystem.
Sure. Thank you, Eli. I really appreciate that lead in. And I'm really excited about the trust reports. I think that one of the challenges when you're on the procurement side of this is figuring out what to ask, figuring out, in a world where things are shifting, how to compare apples to apples, and make sure that you've got a standard kind of rule stick to hold everything to. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we at Jasper have sort of approached building a Copilot in a way that is, not only is sort of opinionated in how its approach to responsibility and to governance, but also is flexible enough to kind of evolve with the times. It's a really interesting space, as you all know. We are at the early stages of regulation. We are at the early stages of understanding. We think we have a good handle on the risk, but we're at the early stages of understanding all the nuances of that. And so being able to be both sort of firm in your approach and then also expansive is a unique challenge, right? And adaptable is a unique challenge. So I'll walk through kind of how we've thought about this as a co-pilot, and certainly always room for improvement. But I thought it might give a good framework as well for either other AI platforms or for users in kind of evaluating an AI platform's approach. So for us, we think about it on kind of three levels. The first is, how do we set the policies internally that are going to govern the decisions that we make about how we build our platform, how we engage with customer data, how we use our product ourselves. There is this world of kind of just setting up the language and the policies that needs to come, I say, almost first, even before you're building the product, as a foundation. And so, for us, this is something that we try to permeate through the entire company, but it does have a clear leader in our security team. And they are responsible for building and managing the entire security program. So that means a number of things. That means things like adhering to things like SOC 2 and getting our having external kind of compliance testing and certification to make sure that we are checking ourselves along the way as we're building this. That means doing regular penetration testing. It means being careful with intentional with where we store data and how we protect it in those locations. It means having standards for, how long you retain data and what people can do to get their data removed. All of these sort of standard processes that most companies have to build upon in order to sort of put a responsible product out there. So all the things you kind of see on this list go into our overarching policy for the protection of data, the protection of our stack from external threats, vulnerabilities to the product, and put together sort of a nice foundation for how we can approach that work. So it starts with that policy. Then, thank you, Eli. From there, we think about how is it that we're going to build this Copilot in a way that reinforces sort of that commitment and those standards for protection. So there's a lot of decisions that we've made in the way that we have built the platform. Again, there is the fact that we do not pass our customer data through to train underlying models. There's the fact that we have things like SSO to encourage kind of better management of passwords. There's lots of little decisions along the way. I want to highlight one that I think is important and has been really kind of instrumental in giving us that adaptability alongside of the sort of strong standards of the core. And that is what we call interoperability. So Jasper as a platform, it is language model agnostic, right? So we tap into a wide range of LLMs, even beyond the ones mentioned here. So OpenAI, Google, Anthropic's, Cohere, Stabilities, our own kind of custom models that we've been developing, a diverse range of language models. Do that for a couple of reasons. Number one, having a diverse range of models like that prevents you from being overly reliant on any one of those models. Even if it were our own, even if it were the one that we have, custom built that's perfect for our marketer use case, even that we don't want to be overly reliant on, because we want to talk about business continuity. We want to make sure that what we're offering to our customers is not putting all their eggs in one basket. And so we've sort of built Jasper to be able to operate across all of these different models. And that brings with it benefits in uptime, in reliability. If one model goes down, we can automatically switch to the others to ensure that there is that business continuity. So that kind of reliability is one benefit, but another benefit is just adaptability as this industry changes. So we feel really good about the partners that we have. We've had really good relationships with them. We sort of feel like we understand where they stand on security, and they've met all of our stringent standards for security, ethics, etc. But this world is changing very fast, and so we want to be able to evolve alongside of these partners, and sometimes maybe divergent from them if they go in a direction that is counter to sort of our standards for responsible use, right? And so having interoperability across these allows us more flexibility to do that. And so that's made a major difference in kind of how we think about what we can deliver to our customers in terms of providing the highest level of privacy, security, regardless of the models that we use. Hopefully that makes sense. I think the other nice thing about interoperability has nothing to do with security, but I'll mention it because I benefit from it as a marketer. There's diversity in these models. Some of them are better than others at some things. And so it allows us to be able to, when a prompt comes in, to be able to find the model that is best in the world at handling that particular need. And so it's our belief that coming out of this interoperability, we get greater reliability, greater adaptability as things change, and frankly, like better outcomes outputs from the Copilot altogether, because it is enriched by the many models that go into it. So wanted to pause there on that, but choices like that will help inform, the security you're putting into place today and what the long run looks like for your Copilot. The final one that I would point to is about customer education. So setting the right policies as the foundation, building your product or selecting the tech stack that brings the best, that manifests those policies in the best way. And then the final piece that we think a lot about is customer education. This is a wildly different world than a lot of our enterprise companies are used to. And it's not their fault. If you look back, the number of times this year that I have looked back and tried to remember where I was a year ago and how much has changed in the span of just a few months, it's incredible. And so we've had, as industries, had to very quickly learn. And there's not the fascinating thing with this technology is the learning curve for this thing is not technical. It is very intuitive to engage with generative AI. The learning curve is strategic and it's cultural. And so knowing and helping elevate people's awareness of the limitations, the best standards of use, the best practices of leveraging this technology in a way that advances outcomes and minimizes risks, that's a whole world in and of itself. So we spend a lot of time on the customer education side. We sort of feel like that is part of our product in the same way. So some examples here. We have a transparency statement that we put up on our website about our own use of AI. We put that forward to our customers to use as an example, to use as inspiration for their own. Same deal, we have a sample usage policy, our internal policy for, you can see it over there on the right, for what responsible AI usage looks like at Jasper. That is something that we built for our internal audience, but then made public to share with our customers. And then obviously they need to take that and meet with their own teams and their legal teams and all of that and adapt it. But sometimes having a little bit of framing and inspiration can help start those conversations. We also have a training program for new customers that infuses these concepts of where's AI weak, where is it strong, where are uses that you can rely on, where are uses that you may want to think, differently about, and make sure that our customers are equipped to have those conversations internally, up-level the AI literacy across their organization, and make the most of their time on Jasper. And then because we know that enterprises aren't just comprised of their own teams, they work with outside marketing agencies, they work with outside solutions partners. We try to extend that training to any of the agencies that they work with. And then we also have developed just this year a directory of sort of certified agencies that we know have gone through training on things like security, training on things like responsible use, the limitations of AI, et cetera. So that we can kind of build up this ecosystem, as Eli said, to sort of tackle this thing together. And then finally, as I said, this world is changing very quickly. And one of the timelines that we're keeping track of is as different governments understand the impact of AI and the potential of it and start to roll out regulations, we try to play a role in explaining what parts of those regulations are most important for companies to pay attention to, what do they need to prepare for in the coming year, and how do they evolve their policies, tech stack and internal education alongside of those changes. So hopefully that's helpful. I think that, to sort of recap, it's not enough to think about security, responsible use on any one of these layers. We try to think about it at each layer and the intersections between them, so that we can really surround this need with a ton of tools to be able to make sure that companies are getting the best use out of this technology and using it in ways that advance their business without causing undue harm. So that's really been our approach. I think the final point here, Eli, is just, we've, over the last year, it seems like everybody has hopped into the AI pool, right? We're all splashing around, we're experimenting, we're posting about it a lot. There's like countless articles out there, but we're kind of coming to the end of what I think is the acceptable experimentation window for this. And we need to shift gears heading into the coming year, if we haven't already, and many of you probably have already, to really thinking about how do we systematize this? How do we get serious around the standards that we have internally and externally for our use of it? And, if our own motivations aren't enough to get us there, there are plenty of external motivations that are coming on a daily and monthly basis to help push us along, right? So just Friday, the EU reached an agreement on their first AI act. We saw a few months ago the Biden administration released its executive order on AI safety and security. That laid out a full timeline of recommendations and reports that are coming out over the course of the year. So understanding not just kind of where your stance is today, but what are the milestones that might shape that stance moving forward and getting ready for those is something I'd highly recommend. And then there's always the things that we can't predict. New releases, new products that come out of nowhere, that seemingly come out of nowhere, that add a new layer of interaction or complexity to our worldview of how we think about AI in our businesses. So I would say it is not a boring time to be in this space. That's the good news. I think the bad news, or the constructive news, is it is going to require that we step up in many ways. It's going to require that we, amid busy schedules, that we have those conversations internally, that we create a scalable framework from which to think about and develop a perspective on our unique approach within each company to this. But I think if we can do that, we can harness the tremendous power of this technology and feel good about the ways in which we do so. So I think that's it for me, and we can open it up for, I think, 10 or 15 minutes of questions or so. But thank you so much for listening. And yeah, we're here to take any questions.
Thanks so much, Megan. Feel free to put questions into the Q&A chat, and we'll take them split them between the two of us as appropriate.
Keely, maybe one question I have for you while we're waiting for other questions to come in is, I've been really curious. I've loved the thought that you guys have put into the trust reports. And I've been really curious to hear a little bit more about, speaking of frameworks, like, how did you draw those lines? How did you decide what to include and what not to? How did you decide what comments to put on what things?
For sure. So the initial version of the trust report, I guess first thing I'll say is that we have one version of the trust report now, which is a questionnaire for a vendor to answer and ultimately share the resulting sort of nicely formatted and beautiful report with their customers. Our vision is that will grow into sort of maybe following sort of NIST AI RMF, more specific, questionnaires for specific areas, and also more deep in any given area or in sort of the general report. And so our first report really boils down to, these are the top line things that our customers have been asking about. So we work with primarily Global 2000 and highly regulated industries. And so they are, there's a heavy emphasis in our initial report on, or our initial questionnaire on, data privacy, data security, and then getting a little bit into sort of the more AI specific stuff, hallucination risk, performance risk. But ultimately, where we think this is headed is into sort of a way for vendors to show that they have a comprehensive risk management framework stood up, and ultimately, different procurers will have different standards for different use cases. They'll maybe want sort of that simple questionnaire if it's a lower risk thing. If it's energy infrastructure or something very high risk, then they're going to require increasingly complicated and comprehensive responses.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know there's some questions coming in the Q&A, so I might give you a minute to search through those.
So I'll take this first one. Somebody asked, how does Credo evaluate the areas in the trust report? Is it done via AI, or do you interview the companies? So AI is not a part of how our trust report works. We have some AI features on our product roadmap for our primary software platform offering, that those features should be announced sometime in Q1 of 2024. For the trust report, it really is a communication between us and the vendor. So it's essentially a way for us to standardize the communication between the vendor and enterprises. Enterprises have all sorts of questions that they want to ask, and we guide our enterprise customers in sort of what are the most important things that they should be asking, and then do the job of communicating that to our vendors like Jasper, or the vendors, not our vendors, like Jasper. And so ultimately, the information that a company like Jasper is providing is their information, right? We aren't testing their systems at this time. Some people ask about this from time to time, and it's something that we're thinking about doing, but we're not red teaming, a vendor systems. We are just, setting the stage of what is the information that should be exchanged, and then providing a venue for that information exchange to happen.
Definitely. And then Norman also asked, are the reports static or are they updated? And if so, how frequently are they updated?
So we just launched this, and so every report is that we have is on version 1. Ultimately, the goal would be to have regular updates, no less frequent than once a year. But we are sort of testing this right now, and if it becomes the case that certain pieces of information can't stay stale, right? So you updated from GPT-4 to GPT-5, right? That's something that we are looking at closely. Another thing that I think is relevant here, for instance, is regulation. So one component of our trust reports asks the vendor, which laws are you compliant with, or which standards are you compliant with? So things like SOC 2 are also included. And if a company, is newly compliant with a regulation, we want to provide them the opportunity to talk about that, to advertise that. And similarly, if a new regulation comes up, so for instance, if the EU AI Act ultimately passes, I know we've heard that they've reached agreement, and so it's likely to pass. That would be something that would then be added to the report, and we would send it out, similar to asking for address updates in your Christmas card, address book.
Sense. Sandy asked a good question that I'm happy to hop on, which is trusted AI really possible, or is it a question instead of handling risk? And I think it is a question of handling risk. I think that what is possible is trusted AI teams, right? So, or companies being able to trust kind of because of the transparency and the reporting and them earning it, being able to trust a given a technology provider or a vendor or third party evaluators to get you to a place where you feel on most solid ground with this technology. But it's, at the end of the day, it is a tool like anything else. It can be used well, it can be used poorly. And so the trust should be put in the hands of the people who are deploying it and the people who are using it. And that is the question I would ask, is how well do I trust this company, this provider, this team to use this well?
A question that I think both of us, Megan, will have some perspective on, but I'll put it to you first. How are you dealing with explainability and explain the open/closed source systems with Gen AI?
Yeah, so just to 101 it, explainability is the concept of being able to show how a particular LLM or tool arrived at an output, arrived at a decision. And in the world of language models, there are open source and there are closed sourced. I will say that Jasper leverages both, right? Again, going back to that interoperability, we have some underlying models that we use that are closed, like OpenAI. We have some that are open, like Anthropic. And so we've got sort of variance in there. I think there is a place for both types of models in the space, and we'll see sort of where regulation goes. But that's, our approach has been to build in a way that is agnostic so that we can leverage the benefits right now of a diverse array of approaches. And then as time progresses and we sort of figure out what is the best approach, we can adapt if we need to. What are your thoughts on that, though, Eli?
So I'll start with the open and closed source part. I think from an explainability perspective, there isn't too much of a difference. The models are similar enough, and the research community, I think, is nascent enough on LLM explainability that we have sort of the same difficulties in explaining outputs with both, say, a GPT-4 model, or if you're using Llama. There's maybe a little bit more that you can do that's with the open source model if you have the weights, but that's, I think, a little too niche for what I want to get into here. On the how do you deal with explainability side, we advise our customers that you shouldn't trust the model to explain its results, even if it gives an explanation for some output. it could be that that's a hallucinated explanation. And so by and large, every use that we talk to our customers about is a use that we recommend be a human in the loop use, right? Not giving over agency, giving over tasks 100% to a generative AI system, and instead using it for things like code writing, which a human, vets the resulting code, for marketing copy writing, which a human ultimately vets the result. And I think the field will develop to where we can have a little bit more sort of mathematical assuredness in results and explanations of results. But for right now, it really does need to be a human in the loop paradigm.
And Eli, if I can correct myself for a moment, I misspoke a moment ago. So Anthropic is actually not open source, but Llama and others are. Even with all of these models popping up, I get the wires crossed sometimes.
Fantastic. Norman asked, should I think of the trust reports evolving into a type of certification similar to ISO or UL? Can you talk about the role of standards and government bodies in the process in the future? I think this is a great question. We put out our trust reports largely because standards haven't really been established yet, right? There are a bunch of individual standards, and the industry hasn't sort of focused on one specific thing. From our perspective, if the industry, in the same way that in cybersecurity, SOC 2 has become this, yes, you're SOC 2 compliant, I don't need to worry about X, Y, and Z. If we can get to that point with AI, maybe it'll be NIST, maybe it'll be ISO 42001. We think that would be great. And we are eagerly anticipating the day when we can build a trust report and trust report questionnaire that is grounded entirely in a standard like that. And right now, trust reports are sort of the on-ramp. If you're familiar with NIST is maybe a little too heavy, especially for, say, a seed stage startup or a Series A startup. And those organizations could be building relatively not risky AI, and they need a way to communicate that and to show that on the things that really matter, on the things that matter to enterprises, and then be able to say, all right, from here it's a communication, right? The trust report is the first step in that relationship. It's not the end all be all of the procurement relationship. And maybe, hopefully, it will soon be the case that the industry focuses and we can turn trust reports into reporting on adherence to a standard. So we're just about 2 minutes from our cutoff. Maybe we can take one more question, and then we're happy to take any questions offline. Feel free to reach out. Maybe Lucas, I'll ask you to come off mute, and maybe if people have questions, or if they how should they engage with us to get those questions answered?
Yes, certainly, Eli. So coming off mute, and apologies for my rather sick voice, but I'll be sending out the recording and slides via email. It should be Thursday morning. And so at that time, you can just reply to that email with any questions, and it'll go to me, and I can source it to the best person to answer.
Fantastic. And we'll take just one more question. So what is your strategy on working in the rapidly changing regulatory environment? For instance, the trade-off between foundational AI technologies that are state-of-the-art and the fact that some of them might become, at least temporarily, unavailable when regulations evolve. So from our perspective, we advise our customers on compliance and then provide software tools for them to prove compliance. And so our strategy is really just to be up to date on that environment as much as possible. So our software platform is always up to date with whatever is the latest official bill or official text of an act. And we can, through our services offering, our AI Academy, which is launching in Q1, we can advise on how organizations should think about something like Do I use Llama because maybe it will be available for longer, or do I use GPT-4 because it's a more powerful model? But ultimately, that really is a case by case advising, answer. Megan, I'm curious, as a builder, how is you talked a lot about interoperability, so I think this would maybe dovetail nicely with that slide you had.
Yeah, certainly that is a big part of the reason there, but without repeating that point, I think the other thing to keep in mind here is I've been pretty impressed with both the EU AI Act and the executive order. They've been pretty transparent about a timeline for adherence, right? So EU, assuming it fully passes, would go into implementation in 2025, right? So that gives you a full year to assess the regulation, understand, hear from your vendors about how well they fit it today, how quickly their plan would be to fit it moving forward, and to get ahead of any disruption that you would need to encounter because of moving regulation. I mean, the technology is moving really, really fast. The regulation, for better or worse, is not moving as quickly, for better and worse, I would say. But the better side of that is they're being thoughtful around, not jerking the wheel too fast and giving people time to incorporate those guidelines. Because I think, government, companies, organizations alike all want to find their way to the best use of this technology. And so, there shouldn't be, and I have not seen an adversarial relationship among that collection. I think everyone is trying to figure out how do we collectively sort of move productively through this unheard of advancement in technology. So I think you have time is the short answer. But I do think it takes paying attention and having those conversations with the providers that you work with.
For sure. Thank you so much, Megan. That's going to do it for our webinar today. Thank you so much for joining us. As Lucas said, you'll receive a recording very soon, and then we're looking forward to keeping this conversation going. I know I really enjoyed it, and I'd like to thank Megan again for joining us today.
I'm so grateful to have been invited. Thanks for having me, Credo team.